The term watch collecting can bring with it a lot of connotations. One who is a collector of watches, obviously, but also the notion of the things around watches. Straps, obviously, but even the ads or documentation or things even just adjacent to the watch or brand. And then there are sub-communities within the watch fam, like in the case of today's guest. In the military, or even military watches, have other little tokens around them that people seek out at great lengths, from service patches of the personnel who maybe wore the watch in a conflict or war. Now, outside military watches, there's also the notion of provenance, the fact that watches can be traced back to an individual wearer. With some, it's as simple as flipping them over. Case-back engravings go way back from military watches to just watches that were gifted by one family member to another and kept as heirlooms. And in those familial cases, a lot of the times, it's the family photography around the person who wore that watch that brings a value to that watch that goes beyond just the chunk of metal it is. No matter if it lived its life summiting mountain peaks, diving seas, or living life with its wearer, spending time with their family. All of these little things, whether that be trinkets, photos, memories, case-back engravings, or other aspects around a watch, are just as important to the watch collecting collector as the dial, hands, and case itself. And on today's episode, we're going to dive into the notion of collecting around a watch, and maybe even reframing it, breaking down collecting into really what it means to collect the ing around a watch. You've tuned into the Analog Explorer podcast. Read about my analog manifesto, my passion for photography, and my love of travel and watches, both in print and online at analogexplorer.com. Back on the Analog Explorer is my good podcast friend Dan from the Zulu Time podcast, and we're going to be doing a collab. See, this is the second half of an episode that we recorded around collecting around a watch. So, to collect both halves of this episode, you're going to have to do a little bit of watch collecting yourself, or at least collecting around this watch podcast. And that is subscribe to Dan's show, the Zulu Time podcast, in your favorite podcast app of choice, as well as here at the Analog Explorer.
This episode is all about collecting around a watch.
Yeah.
So like I said, this came out the back of an article that Cole Pennington wrote about what other items you collect around the watch. And that got me thinking. So like for me, AJ and the military are a little bit, as you've realized, the military are like magpies. We like things that are shiny, hard to get hold of, and or not yours to get hold of. So you either have to grease the wheel somehow with favors or packets of biscuits to get certain things. And that's the currency that we work in the military. More recently, however, just so you're aware, we like to swap kits.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the military, we like to swap patches. We like to swap bits of stuff that we know we can just swap because, well, for me, like, I don't really care about X or Y or whatever. And that has born into my collection of what I like to call generic podcast stuff, right? Which is stuff like patches, it's coins.
Yeah.
Challenge coins have been a big thing. And then, like you said, other stuff like catalogs and photos, or media, like printed media seems to be a big thing in watches. Have you seen, I've seen a lot of the old fashioned kind of watch adverts that are now being painted and framed, or people commission people to do some artwork based off a watch, and I think that's quite cool.
Yeah.
And it made me look at my collection effectively and think, well, actually, what do I collect around the watch? And I've got a few things. Obviously, I've mentioned that, like I said, I've got a big set now of watch-specific challenge coins, and I just want to give you out a few ones off the top of my head. Obviously, I've got the company ones. So, like, for example, when I've done special projects with Braemon, I've got the up-to-date set of challenge coins that were commissioned by the Braemon military team since I've become a project leader. And I think that's really cool. Some of them are numbered, some of them got some really cool designs on it, be it the military team design logo or like a watch light movement, which I think is quite cool. Right through to patches where I've got obviously the Zulu Time podcast patches, which everyone I like to think wants to collect, guys. Your patches that have come through, from the Bellingham podcast. And then I've even got unit patches, or I've got patches from listeners where I've swapped out patches, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff that I can seem to collect. But what I found interesting about the whole collecting around the watch was Cole never mentioned the thing that everyone collects around the watch without even thinking about it. And you collect stories, and that's really holistic and kind of deep there. But we all collect stories. I mean, if I look at my watch box, every single watch that I've got has a story, be it how I got it or what I've done with it.
Yeah.
And I felt that was interesting that they went down the route, or Hodinkee went down the route of actual material things that tied in. And what I liked was he had, for his World War II watches, he had some unit patches from World War II,
that was cool.
Period correct or reproduction. I've got some of the original clasp knives from World War II, because it's just another thing that you can get hold of fairly cheaply, but that you can actually still use them,
right.
Because it goes back to it, like the build quality on clasp knives from the 1940s are a lot better than the clasp knives of 2015. Now, that's not to say that they're not bad, but the fact that I can still sharpen a knife that is 82 years old and use it for daily stuff is still pretty good.
Sure.
I don't think I'll be able to do that for my one that I was issued. But it was interesting that they went down the material route for collecting around the story. And that's why I thought that me and you differ in the fact that our watches have got collections of their own, but in the stories that we've gained, through using those watches.
Yeah.
And I just kind of wanted to highlight a few of your collection, really, and obviously just bounce them back and forth to see if we had any similarities across our collections, because I like to think we're quite similar people in our mindset and activities that we do outside of the watch fan.
No, totally. So for me, I have to kind of rewind to how, and I don't think I've really talked. I've mentioned on the Bellingham podcast that I got into watches because as a little kid, my dad was a diver and he had a dive watch, and that was quintessentially what I thought watches were. They have a bezel, a fidget spinner for an adult. And, it was a tool. Back in that day, the prime time of all diving, it was your dive computer. If you did not have that, you get bent. That was the stories that I heard from my dad. And I remember I was probably in third or fourth grade, and it's show and tell time, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have something to show and tell. And so my dad this one day was just like, well, hey, do you want to take Dad's dive watch? And I was like, okay. And so here I am, a third or fourth grader, and I got to bring my dad's dive. I remember as a kid, you go to your elementary school and you go to your classroom, and there was this box, and it was a special lock box. So you could put your stuff in there. That way, now as a teacher, I understood why my teacher did that. So you weren't playing with the thing you were doing. Okay, and it was locked up and stuff, and so I didn't have to worry about my dad's watch being stolen or anything. And so I take it out of this box, and I talk about, my dad used to be a diver, and he came from California, and he dove from California all up to Washington, almost to where I'm at here in Bellingham, this one summer and stuff. And, it's just a story that I knew because growing up, that's what I always heard. And, my dad would talk about the kelp beds and abalone, different sizes of abalone up north versus down south in California. And it's all stories that I still remember. I remember after that show and tell thing, my teacher let me keep it because it's a watch. And here I am with a Skin Diver Jubilee, Longines Wittnauer Jubilee watch. And I thought I was the biggest, coolest kid on campus, man. Here I am wearing my dad's watch. And to me, on a wrist of, I don't know, I have no idea what my wrist size was back then. I might as well have been rocking a Panerai. It was just huge. Mm-hmm. My dad cinched it down with probably a piece of nylon strap that just would fit my wrist at the time. And that really hung on to me. That I still remember to this day, the feeling that I had as a little kid wearing my dad's Jubilee watch. And eventually it evolved into, when I got older, I got a watch. And my dad got me it's a Loris. So... Mm-hmm. I mean, probably over there in the UK and in Europe, you guys know Loris more than we do over here in the States. But Loris is a subsidiary of Seiko Epson, and it just was just a resined black with a kind of a green dial, analog digital watch, and it has a similar movement to the old Arnie's or the mini Arnie's. It has a Seiko VO41 6000 for anyone who really wants to really geek out. And really, it was no nothing. You know, I think it was probably like my dad probably spent $50 on it.
Mhm.
But you know, 100 meters water resistant. Had a digital display on the bottom and then an analog display up above. Mercedes hands. You know, but as a kid, I wore the ever-loving stuffing out of that watch to the point where for I don't know, I probably got 4 or 5 years out of that watch. I shredded the crown straight off, and it has crown guards. I shredded the crown right off, but it still would have worked. And I in between moves and growing up and stuff, like I lost it. I recently reacquired one new old stock. It took me a while because again, they were a no nothing watch,
Mhm.
but I have it again and stuff. My son's worn it and stuff, but it's those two watches kind of are the things that kind of set me into, you know, never getting out of watches.
Mhm.
I stopped wearing wristwatches when I was in high school, not because of the iPod or anything like that. It hadn't been invented yet. But because I shredded the crown off that watch, I actually got into pocket watches. I was a weird high schooler who would wear pocket watches. I had, you know, the little chain hanging out of my pocket in my jeans. And it was funny because I did that because I was so active and I didn't want to shred another crown. I went through a couple of Timex not Explorers, expeditions, and I would always shred the crown or grind the crystal and stuff. And so I felt like, okay, well, if I have it in my pocket, it won't get as damaged. And so one of the few watches of my childhood I still have, I have a Timex expedition pocket watch. So like a 50 meter or 100-meter water resistant
Mhm.
pocket watch. The movement in it is completely dead now, but I still hang on to it because anybody who remembers me in high school will remember that watch on me, and specifically the chain because I always had a little bell. So I'd always go around. I had a little bell on me. So it was just funny. It was just one of those things where, as a quirky high schooler, that's what I was known for. Anybody who knew me in elementary school would know me for that black Loris watch, and those that's the collection for me around any watch, whether it's from my past or currently. Like I look at watches as, and I wrote about it in the Analog Explorer. Like these are things that are just automata that are on your wrist and are keeping little memories for the wearer. You know, for the duration that it will succeed the person who's wearing it. And for me, it's like all about the ing. What was I doing? Was I hiking? Was I traveling? I collect the ing around the watch
Mhm.
because for me, like it's not about the price. Price doesn't have an ing. Maybe what you're spending, but that's not an ing that I enjoy. Like some people save up and they want to be spending something on a watch. For me, I want to be spending time. And
Mhm.
so for the two other ones in my collection that you are well aware of is the Baltic. You know, this became the watch of the pandemic for me because it was the first Father's Day in the pandemic. My wife got it for me, and it was bronze, and I wore it for a year straight in the pandemic. And then it became, like you said, it looks almost like it's DLC. It's so
It
dark,
does look DLC, yeah.
and that's just pure. Like I can't replicate that, and that's what I said during the Ranger report. You know, if I had an option of like, oh, if I could trade this in straight up for a Ranger, would I do it? Hell no. Like just because I look at this and I can tell you, you know, how my son's health was doing at the time. A lot of this is oil rubbed bronze at this point because we had to put a lot of lotion on him because of his skin conditions. You know, I can look at this and go, you know, this is me trekking up Mount St. Helens and summiting and getting
Mhm.
caught up there with two storms. You know, I can look at this and go like, that's what I see in this watch, and you know that to me is more important than, you know, what I was spending on a watch. It's
Mhm.
what I'm spending with a watch. The other one that I have that just has a really cool story, and by the time this comes out, I'll probably have it published on my blog or my Substack, is the SKX 031, which
Mhm.
is an obscure SKX. It's basically looks like a kind of like a Tudor Snowflake or a Submariner style Crown at 3 Seiko. But it came out the same year as the SKX 007, you know, another watch that, you know, we all know and love.
Mhm.
Has the 7S26 movement in it, but it had only 10 bars water resistance, still a screw down crown,
Mhm.
and had a better dial on it than the SKX did because it had applied indices, it had a framed, chrome framed date window, still has day date. And that whole thing came about because after I built the PNW 001 and all the learning lessons about that, I was like, instead of going into Swiss, because that was expensive, should have probably started in this whole modding thing in Seikos. And
yeah, I mean, there's only a community.
Yeah, well, but again, bear in mind, like I was doing all of this in 2015, 2016. There wasn't as much of a community. Like you did not have, Crystal Time Horology. You didn't have, DAG-Ads was there and stuff. But really, it was Nick Harris, now of Orion Watches. I found out about him, and he at the time was studying here in Seattle for to be a watchmaker at the watchmaking school. And I found his blog way before there was Orion Watches, and he had this great rundown of like, here's how you trade out a dial on I think it was like the SNK 807 or whatever, because he made his own dials. He had a like a California style dial, and I just bookmarked his blog because he was actively sharing how to go about doing stuff. And even though it wasn't on the movement at the time that I was working on, because I was working on Sellita, I was like, I'll come back to this. This guy's really into sharing. Cool, great. And so after I learned and broke a lot of things, I came back to that article, and I DM'd Nick a few times and stuff, and he was always open to sharing and stuff. Or if I blew a stem or if I was having problems doing stuff, he was always encouraging. It was just really cool. That whole essence of that conversation with him and several others spurred the Analog Explorer podcast. Like I got to know people collecting. I was collecting friends in the watch fam while I was building a watch for my son or learning how to mod and stuff. And I was collecting the people who were open. And that was great. And now I have friends. I have you. So I built I was putting together the SKX031, and I was really having a hard time sourcing a legitimately good case because these cases were thrashed, man. Like people wore the ever-loving stuffing out of them. And, I don't have a lathe. I can't return stuff. So I need something that, if it's thrashed, I can polish, I can do all of that. But like I need it to be at least serviceable. I was just having a hard time finding one that didn't have a crown tube that was blown or whatever. Like I was just having a hard time. And so Nick, he had graduated, and funny enough, he put up on his Instagram, he was having a garage sale. And I was just like, oh, awesome. If anybody is going to have something, it's going to be, I call him the mod father, because really from that era, anybody who was into Seiko modding, you came across Nick's writing. So I reached out to him, and I was just like, mate, if you've got, a 0040 case, for an old SKX 031, let me know. I'd love to buy it off you. And he didn't have anything posted on it. And so he actually rummaged through and found one. And it was in rough shape, but I asked him, it's like, is it in serviceable rough shape? He goes, yeah, it's going to take some elbow grease, but yeah, it's totally workable. So I bought it off of him, and that was the starting point for that project. And originally I was going to do a mod. And the more and more I got into why it was so difficult to find this damn case, I wanted to kind of bring it up to spec. Like I liked what Seiko really was trying to do with that watch for that era. It was more of that skin diver watch, bidirectional bezel. Wasn't really ISO certified like the big brother, the 007 or the 013, the smaller version of it. And so I found a dial that was original, but I found one out of Spain from sourced it, and then I got to know other people. There was a guy online who was cutting crowns to fit this case because, again, there wasn't a lot of boutique parts to find. You had to know somebody. And he actually upgraded it to like a twin lock style gasketing system as opposed to a single glob of gasket that Seiko does. And so I bought that off of him and put this together. And really, for me, like my SKX 031, and there's not many out there. The hashtag, if you were to look at it, there's maybe a couple hundred versus several tens of thousands on the SKX 007. For me, it's kind of the Mark II, because I tried to keep it as tried and true to what Seiko originally had done with the dial and the case. Updated the crown to a signed crown just because I could. The movement inside is a white label NH36, so it gets hand winding and hacking, the upgraded version to the 7S26. I upgraded it to a domed crystal because at the time I couldn't get a flat crystal that fit it. And in doing so, I had to upgrade the bezel insert to a sloped bezel just to make it look better. and I upgraded it to a ceramic, and that became the blue SKX031. And then I cut the case back with a local engraver with a sigil that kind of is my family, which is the north, south, east, west compass rose. But in between the northwest, southwest, northeast, southeast is elements of the northwest. So there's a lighthouse, a wave that looks like the Great Wave of
the Fukushima wave.
Yeah, and mountains, of course. And so that, as well as the engraving that I put on the PNW001, which is the coordinates of our backyard, because the PNW001 and my SKX007, all three of those watches were around as my son and I started his journey in his medical stuff and coming out of it, but also our journey into what I call adventure school. And wherever he goes, like when I'm long and dead and gone, hopefully his watch is around. Hopefully he likes them and still wears them. But those case backs, I want him to look back wherever he ends up in the world, maybe in England, and go, he remembers where he came from and what we went through in his childhood. And, these are just little mementos of it, I don't know which one's going to cling on to in his mind the most. Maybe it'll be the Baltic. I have no idea. But I want him to have, I know this is a very long-winded solo story that I gave, but it comes back to collecting around the story of when I was a kid and my dad's Jubilee Wittenauer watch.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of talking there. Sorry, man.
No, man. No, it's a good story though, isn't it? 'Cause, it encompasses the fact that, and I think that was the main drawback that I had with the Hodinkee article. And like I said, and there's no slight on Cole's writing at all.
No, Cole's the goods.
I message him fairly often about stuff like this. And I think the reason it wasn't mentioned was because I think it's just assumed that people collect memories and collect stories of their watches now.
Yeah.
And I think we do have these blogs and these watch review websites to thank for that, and the wider watch media that's a lot bigger than us to thank for the fact that people in this weird and wonderful hobby just naturally tend to collect stories about them. But it's one of those, I think, like I said, it was for me, I just wanted to highlight it and to hear like effectively the reasons why you've collected what you've collected and how you've gone about it is just, like I said, it's just very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of the 031, I've actually seen a few on eBay. In fact, I sent you one.
Yeah.
I would still pick one up actually.
Yeah.
What I like about them is like they're different. I actually don't really get on well with the SKX 007 case. I don't really like it as much. I think it's a little bit more Marmite. But I do like the 013s because the hashtag, I believe, that follows them is Seiko Submariner.
Yes.
Yes.
There's two. There's either Seiko Submariner or Seiko Snowflake. Those are typically the two mods that most guys do. They'll trade out the handset for the Mercedes, or they'll trade it out for the Snowflake, which, full disclosure, that's what I'd originally had thought I was going to do until I kind of went down the rabbit hole. Like I said, I'll have a post up because it's what, I don't know. I'm well known for having mine and have worn it, a lot. And so I've put together a post of like kind of the heritage and history of like the 7S26 movement and the watches that came out and derived from that that made the SKX model more than just the 007, as well as like some of the parts and who I talked to get the one that I've got put together, just because like there's not a lot on it. And I've had loads of people ask me about it and stuff. And when it comes to like trying to identify whether or not it's going to be a third party dial or not, it's best if I see them because they've gotten really good. I used to just say if the back of the dial isn't the stamped style applied indices, then you know that it was an aftermarket one. Now I've seen some aftermarket ones copy that even. They're stamping them as opposed to just using the feet and soldering them on or gluing them on. So it's hard to tell, but if you see one that's right and then you see a dial that's wrong, you can tell that it's a third party. The cases, I can't tell. Just like you and I were talking about with the moon swatches, they're hard unless there's somebody that's honest that says that this is a aftermarket, which I have no beef with. I just have a beef with somebody saying like this is OEM, and I can look at it and go, well, that Crown 2 actually isn't OEM. I have a beef with that, but like other than that, like again, I have a Franken watch. Like it's not an original 031. I don't claim that it is. It's Mark II for me. And if you're in that ilk, like it's a cool case, 7S260040 case. And there's also a smaller version too. There was the SK, so the 031, and then there's the 023, which is the 013 to the 007, if you want to think of that. It was their mid-size case. That one's an interesting one because it doesn't have a rehot. It's actually just a fully printed dial. And that one really has like the vintage vibes. Had a black dial, a white dial with gilt.
I like those ones.
Yeah, I think that one comes in at, because the 031 comes in at, I think, like 39 and a half or something like that, because it's Seiko. It's a 39 millimeter or 40 millimeter case. And then the 023, I think, comes in at like 37. So it's a little bit smaller. It's also, before anybody goes in, it's just like, oh, get this and mod it. The crown on both of those cases are not the standard SKX 007 or 013 crowns. They're smaller. So before you go down that rabbit hole, make sure that you find, or you're going to ascertain, a smaller crown.
No, they look cool. I really like them.
Yeah.
If you ever want to go down that rabbit hole and build a 023, let me know. I'll encourage you to build it, and then you can send it to me.
Yeah,
it's absolutely fine. But yeah, no, they are really cool. They're genuinely really cool. And like you said, it's going off and collecting off the beaten track. And at the end of the day, with that kind of story, you're collecting the fact that you're building a watch. And I think the skills involved with that, and just the learning process involved in that, will probably bring you out to appreciate a different level, I think, of the wider horology kind of hobby. I think that's for me is my aim for the next couple of years, to kind of, just like I said, just to gently touch into that side of it, just to say that I've kind of not encompassed it all, from both sides of the fence, really, because it does interest me. Like when I've got a watch with a display case back, or you take the back off a watch and you just watch it, you're like, it's just so cool. I just really like watching it, and I know the theory and how it works. I've read enough about it and watched enough of YouTube about it, but actually the ability to stop that movement, break that assembly down, and re-put it back together is something that just interests me. And I think I like I said, my plan will be in the next couple of years kind of actually delve into that. And like I said, even if it's just on one watch, to say I've done it and I can appreciate it, and then when a watchmaker turns around to you and goes, I cannot do anything with this, you can just appreciate why they can't, instead of just looking at them and saying, but your magic with watches, fix it. Give me time.
Yeah, right.
Is what you want to say. Is you can walk away and say, actually, no, I've been under the hood of one of those, and it's pretty difficult. I understand.
Yeah. So, no, again, I will do my normal disclosure. I am not a watchmaker, nor do I play one on podcasts, and that's for our good friend Elena, because she is one, and it's one of those things where it's like it's cool being able to talk to somebody who isn't a watchmaker and just be like, look, I know exactly where my knowledge ends. And again, being open and stuff, because like I can't cut pivots, I can't turn a lathe. I can source stuff and I can swap stuff out that I know, but if you're going to go down that road, like, don't make the mistake I did, which is like, I'm going to build something from scratch and like go get off the shelf parts. And Sellita and Etta are exactly the same, and like I can find everything and put it together. Whoops. Like, start with Seiko. Like, there's a reason why the Seiko mod community has become the cottage industry that it has become. And it's funny because like some people are like, they poo-poo the fact that there's people that are modding it to look exactly like something else. If that's the aesthetic, cool. Just don't call it a Rolex, or don't call it a Seiko if it's not. Just be honest with it. But otherwise, like, make what is a good tool. Like I went the 031 route because I like the case. It's more rounded. It's not quote slab sided like a Tudor or a Rolex. I like that organic. And having been to Japan and Tokyo and been to the old Seiko museum, seeing their history and stuff, I understand why that aesthetic is there, and it resonates a lot with me in the Pacific Northwest, because like Japan and the Pacific Northwest really share a lot of that kind of ethos and culture in nature. And that was important for me. And then beyond that, like, I need something that is going to be able to survive being in a lake or being up in a mountain. So bringing it up to spec, putting, a service crystal, as it were, on it or whatever. I basically took a bunch of junk and made it back to something that somebody wants to use, me. And that's my ultimate story around that one, honestly. I liked it.
And And it's a piece unique, isn't it? At the end of the day.
Yeah, sure. I guess that is a piece unique.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Before we move on to closing notes, AJ, have you got any upcoming watches, mate, that you are interested in looking at getting or anything like that? I just realised we can tie that in there, mainly because I'm looking for ideas. I've got an impending birthday, and I've decided to celebrate it with a watch. So, I was just wondering.
I've got an impending birthday, not this year, but next year. I have my 40th coming up, and I don't know, like, if you would have asked the me of 6 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, I probably would want something big for my 40th. I don't know. There's not something out there, and it's just me, like I haven't seen something where I'm just like, I'm saving up for, or I really want for a big thing. I really like Baltic. I like how their design aesthetic is, but really, like, I think they nailed it out of the park with the watch that I have already. I don't know. I might for like an impending watch purchase, I might reach out to Baltic or Etienne and see if I can't get a sterilized case back, and actually have it cut, and put it on my Aquasgraph bronze. That would probably be the closest thing that I might do. But I have one of the early editions, so it's actually numbered. So I don't know if I want to do that. But no, like for me, it's very much, if I see something, it's got to be organic. I don't have any high grail aspirations. I mean, borrowing this guy, the chronograph, is kind of was the only one because it was just out of reach. I couldn't find one. I couldn't get my hands on one, and on top of that, I'm on the wrong continent to even try to get one. So to be able to borrow it and be like, it's cool. Like, this is something that I've had by the way, I've been timing my half of the podcast with it. So like, being able to look down and go like, oh yeah, we're just coming up to about 30 minutes on the second half of the show. It's cool. It's a different feature for me than turning a bezel. I still think I prefer turning a bezel, but I can appreciate this. And, I don't know, maybe in the future I might borrow more watches than I have just to kind of try them out. Just because, again, I'm more interested in the ing of watches. The watches I have, I'm going to already do. I've got a dive tomorrow. Going down the Mukilteo, and we're going to do some crabbing with a group of people that are part of the dive shop that I got certified in. And I'll probably have either the Baltic or I've already dove with the 007. So I've taken my SKX 007. It's gone down scuba diving like it was intended to do. I'll probably, I don't know. There are some days where I'm just like, yeah, I really want my Baltic, and I want this strap on it because Dan sent me a picture of a Ranger, damn it. But there are other days I just wake up and just like, shake and bake. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
031. Okay, maybe 007. I don't know. I don't have any high aspirations. I don't have a desire to have, like, save up for a Rolex. The Ranger is close. But again, I need a fidget spinner. I might just kind of leave it up. My wife has some pretty good taste lately. I mean, she bought me the Fair, the Rocher World Timer, and
nice
the Baltic,
watch.
and the Aquasgraph. So like, when my 40th rolls around, maybe I'll just be like, honey, what'd you get me? Like, yeah.
Yeah, talking about the ings of watches and borrowing watches and to experiencing watches. I was quite fortunate last month. I managed to borrow a Tynum watch, which was it's Elliot Brown again, but it's 41 mil, and it's their take on a field watch. The one it's got the power reserve at 1 o'clock. Which obviously is a Citizen movement, which is apparently quite hard to get hold of now outside of the Citizen group. Yeah, outside of the Citizen group, as it were. But I think I'm gonna commit my 30th, as it were, for one of those, just because it's so different, to anything that I've got. But it's 41 mil. Again, goes back to it's a nice case size and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting, isn't it, looking at kind of like how your tastes kind of change and develop as you go through as well. Because there was a time a few years ago where I looked at it and I couldn't unsee that
the power reserve.
Yeah. And it's just like, but I've seen it more now. I don't know if it's just because I've seen it more and more of my friends have got hold of them and stuff like that. I'm just like, yeah, I need to get me some of that 41 mil action. You know what I mean? But that's highly likely the watch on my radar. So
that's cool.
So we'll see. But I think for me, in terms of this whole watch collecting side of it, I think it's the idea is continuing down this whole getting things that are unique to me in terms of
Yeah.
what I've done and you know and all that side of it, because that's, I think I would say, is probably what I'm loosely known for now,
Yeah.
is having things that are quite unique, and then you know just playing with that really. But it's one of those, we'll see what happens. And you know, I think as well, like, I've limited in terms of my price point. I now know where I'm happy to play in terms of, like, you know, how much money you're willing to put down on something at any one time, because you know, I'm in a fortunate position, we all are in this hobby, to have the ability to occasionally splurge the expendable cash on something that you know, arguably, and we've said this all the way through all the podcasts and all the posts, that you arguably don't need, because you know, you tell the time by your phone. And
completely, like, and I'll be the first to say, like, you know, when I dive, I have a dive computer. Like, I'm not you know, I'm not relying on that watch. It's more of, you know, I can look at my wrist and be like, oh yeah, that SKX 007 has gone down with me. But at the same time, I will say, like, when I interviewed Graham, Peninsula Kelp Cup, you know, and he, by all intents and purposes, like, he is probably the most avid diver I have ever met.
He's definitely the most avid diver I've ever spoken to.
You know, and but again, super open. The dude is just great. You know, and he and I can't remember if it made it into the cut for the show or not, but I remember he was telling me, like, and I think he had his Elliot Brown on at the time. You know, he was down on a dive and his computer went kaput. And so he actually used he always dives with a watch as a backup. And any diver will tell you, like, that's why you have a buddy, that's why you have an Octo for a second reg and stuff. Like, you have backups, because once you're down there, you can't breathe, and if you come up too fast, you're going to get bent. So, like, you know, even my dad asked me when I got certified, just like, do you? And I go, yeah, I carry a watch with me. Even I do it, not just out of tradition, but in the event of what if. Because I mean, on the mountains, I've been caught with that what if and been screwed, you know, and have been able to come back and tell the stories about it. But, like, that's where there's oxygen. And in the water, there's not a lot of that.
No. Well, there is. You can't access.
I don't have gills, bruh. I don't have gills. So, like, there is that. But no, like, you're right. We don't need a watch per se. But I will say, like, in the some ingings that some of us do, it is useful.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and even if, like you said, even if it's just after the event, look down and say, oh yeah, that went with me on that event, you know, that's enough. I'd say that's enough. I
have a Citizen Eco Drive that got real close to lightning. Yep, I know. I can. Eco Drive has a whole different meaning to me. Let's get the closing notes. What do you got for closing notes? Because I've talked way too much on the second half. So you go first.
Right, man. So my closing notes, I've got a few which are quite pertinent. So one, in fact, I'm sure in the back deepest, darkest archives of the ZT podcast, they probably have already been loosely mentioned before. However, if you weren't aware, AJ, we had a bit of a heat dome last weekend.
Yeah, mate. You were up in the 40 Cs.
Yeah. Like, it was hotter here one afternoon than it was in where my parents live in Cyprus. So it was pretty comparable, because I think we were within 2 degrees of each other, but it was more humid here, obviously, because, you know, we've got the Gulf Stream and all that, than it was in Cyprus. So it made it hotter, because obviously you felt like you were, you know, just couldn't sweat, I guess. So I've got one which is something that, you know, we both have, I believe, or we've got versions of, Hydro Flask.
Oh yeah.
So we talk about adventures and, you know, collecting stories of watches. A lot of mine obviously have been about travel and mountaineering and all that kind of stuff. And when I go out on those little trips, I always have a water bottle, or I'll have something with me to carry brews with. For me, Hydro Flask is the one. During our little heat dome, what I did was I filled it halfway with water. I froze that over, you know, a period of 6 hours, and then took it out, topped up with water. I still had frozen water an ice cube in my Hydro Flask 18 hours later. And that was including the little heat dome that we had. So just a shout out to Hydro Flask. If you don't have one, They come in loads of different shapes, sizes. Go find one that you like. I am a personal advocate of the co-branded Elliot Brown one because it comes in grey. But you know what I mean? Like,
Elliot
it's a
Brown
cool
is not a
flask.
sponsor of today's show,
No, they're
but
not a
we do like
sponsor.
them.
We do like them. We also like Hydro Flask.
Yeah.
But yeah, so go check out Hydro Flask if you haven't got one. Because like I said, 18 hours later, and I still had an ice cube.
Yeah.
I can't beat that.
No, I agree.
You know, and I've had a lot of flasks as well, like going through like the ones you get issued or like the other ones. I've got a tumbler one as well, which I'm always walking around with. But you know, what I like about the Hydro Flask is that it's got a proper locking, but also you can take it apart lid. And I find that's the problem with a lot of flasks. The thing that actually, for me, design wise, that let the flask down isn't the flask itself. It's always the lid component for cleaning. I've had one where they've had like slides and, you know, they just kind of gum up and stuff like that. And whereas, like I said, the Hydro Flask one, they actually do unlock fully. So I'm never without a flask of some kind on any journey that I do now. The second one is TV related, and it's book related actually. So if you want the books, you can go buy the books, read the books, or listen to the books. It is a series by Mark Greaney. It's called the Grey Man series. Recently released on Netflix as The Grey Man, starring
Gosling, right?
Ryan Gosling. He plays the main character. He plays a guy called Court Gentry. And then Anna de Armas is in there as well. I think Anna de Armas is just on a bit of a spy kick in her career lately, obviously out the back of No Time to Die. But a different vibe to Bond. This is obviously quite an action-packed film, but it is one where you can kind of turn off and, you know, not have to think about too much.
Awesome.
There is a couple of watches in there. Actually, product placement in there. I mean, obviously product placement. As people may not know, or they do know, I mean, I don't really follow the company because I personally don't really like them other than the vintage ones. I don't like any of the modern ones that I've come into contact with. But Tag Heuer or Tag are actually in the film because Ryan Gosling is now an ambassador for them. So that was obviously a natural progression. But it was cool. You know, either way, you know, it was cool to see that Tag was in there, obviously, because I think the last big film that they were in were the Kingsman series with the Connected watch. So yeah, go check out the Grey Man series. Like I said, it is a book series. If you like the film, I'd actually tell you always go get the book first, because obviously the book is always better in my opinion. And then I've got two other final ones. So one's an actual photography book. It's by Levison Wood and it's called Encounters. So Levison Wood, as we know, we spoke about him on my podcast before. You know, he's walked the Nile, he's walked the length of the Himalayas, he's done the Darien Gap, the Middle East, and he's recently, last summer released a documentary called Walking with Elephants, which he followed the Great Migration across Africa of the African elephant, which is quite cool. But he has released a photography book because he's actually, you know, a journalist and a photographer. Last year, he managed to get his photography shown in the Leica Gallery in London. I was unable to get to it because of work. However, I bought the book. Mine is actually signed for, and I believe as well, if you type in Encounters, it's not on Amazon, but obviously there's an independent book website that he's kind of loosely affiliated to. He sent a couple, you know, he sent a few box loads, as it were. I don't know how many, but obviously signed edition. So if you want a signed edition, I believe you can still go onto that website. I forget which it's called, but obviously you type in the book name, you'll find it. You can get his photography book. And what's interesting is that it tells you the story of the photo. So he's got a selection of photos in there, obviously really high quality prints, and it'll tell you the story, why he took it, not necessarily how he took it. So you don't get stuff like apertures, apertures, f-stops and all that kind of stuff, but you get the feeling of what was happening to him at the time for him to take that photo, you know. And obviously if it's of a portrait, you know, sometimes there's even, you know, a bit of a story about the individual as well, which is quite cool. But what I like about it, AJ, is the fact that it's actually split up into different areas of photography. So he split it up in terms of culture, travel, environment, and conflict, which is quite interesting. You know, all those kind of remits that he's been quite famous for, should we say, over the last probably coming on 10 years. And then the final one is another thing that was a collaboration with Levison Wood. You might not be able to get hold of them off the website anymore, because I believe they're discontinued, but you will be able to get them new old stock from other sites. And it's a pair of espadrilles by a company which he collaborated with called Oliver Sweeney. And effectively, they are called Darien espadrilles, obviously, and they were formed for his Darien expedition. But effectively, they are nylon espadrilles which have got Vibram soles and like anti-thorn, anti-spike loosely protection on there, quick drying and all that kind of stuff. So for the stuff that we do in terms of both you and I, like I said, a bit of an outdoor adventure every so often, they just pack down really flat. And I found for my travels, be it with work or my personal kind of little travels where I do that kind of stuff, because they pack down really flat, you don't always want to take flip-flops with you for certain trips.
Yes.
But these are still good enough for you to cut around, your campsite, in militarily, you're looking at your harbor area, your forward locations, and still have some protection for your feet, but allow them to breathe when you're not in boots, hiking boots, etc. But then the fact that you can get these wet, they don't have, moisture absorbing insoles and all that kind of stuff, which aid to the fact that these are more for your travel, your adventure, than necessarily going down to the beach club.
Sure.
However, they're still fairly stylish, and you could get away with them at a beach club. So yeah, go check out
the beach clubs that we frequent anyway.
Yes, yeah. But you know what I mean. But like, those are the closing notes that I have for this episode. So hopefully there's enough of a mix there for people to go out and find some stuff to either enrich their collecting with watches or inspire them for their next adventure, travel, etc.
That's killer.
To take a watch on.
So I've got two closing notes. One is one that I've been fiddling around. You probably heard it when I was recording. So I you were saying about collecting around military ephemera of watches and stuff. And challenge coins obviously are a big deal in military, but for civilians, we don't really have anything like that. Well, in the EDC community, the everyday carry community, there are some guys that have started making their own. And I found one, I think it was actually on a watch post on Instagram by a guy named Erling EDC. I think his first name is Ricky. And he makes this coin, which is really kind of cool. It's an old tall ship. And it's my son calls it a pirate ship. This is my pirate coin. And it's got the compass rose around it, and then he's got his anchor and compass rose on the back. But the reason why I came across this coin that it kind of resonated with me is, one, it's not military, but two, it's one of those like memento mori, you see these type of things. That Latin phrase never really resonated with me. This one, he has three simple words: stay the course.
Yeah.
And so like for me, especially with all of the medical stuff that we've had to do with our son and stuff, and the COVID and life and stuff, it really resonated with me. And so he does these in limited drops, and he does some other stuff too, like patches and stuff. But his coins are really highly sought after. I wanted to give him a shout out because I've got now two of his coins. I got this one, and then his full blackout one, which my son stole, and I gotta go find it. I found the watch. He stole my watch, and I got that back, but I gotta find my other pirate coin. But anyway, so for those that are in the watch fam that are civilians like me, but like the notion of like the challenge coin history, the notion of it, take a look at Erling EDC. Like I said, especially if you're like me and you're on the coast and you have an affinity for pirate coins, as my son calls it. The last closing note is I guess collecting around the watch. So my wife and I, one night, we had a date night, something that us parents very rarely forget. And, when you become a parent, you pretty much give up on like being able to watch anything. Like I recently just finally watched The Last Bond. Great movie.
It's been out almost a year, bro.
Yeah, I know. Like I said, between work, that's not a show I get to throw on and have like my 5-year-old watch. So like, so anyway, we have a lot of Disney in the house right now because that's his age. So Disney Plus, I love the classic Disney. I like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm a big Jules Verne fan. Everybody knows that. But I love that classic era of live action adventure movies that Walt Disney used to produce. So like Journey to the Center of the Earth. And then another one I stumbled upon called Third Man on the Mountain out of 1959. It's on Disney Plus here in the States, and you can even find it like at your local library and stuff. But it's based off of the book Third Man on the Mountain, written by James Ramsey Ullman. He was born in 1907, died in 71, and he was an American writer and mountaineer. He was born in New York City, but he was never a high-end climber. But because I get the impression that James Ramsey Ullman, it was kind of like the Jimmy Chin of that era. Like he knew all the right people, could go on all the right climbs, but, you know, he's not an Edmund Hillary.
It's because he was too busy documenting it for others.
He was doing the writing around the guys that were probably wearing watches. But it's a great film. So the book, I believe, is called Banner in the Sky, which is renamed Third Man on the Mountain for the film. But this was the book based off of the true story of the first climbing of the Matterhorn, which I had no idea. And Walt Disney actually filmed it in Switzerland to get the whole ambiance. Like, this wasn't all on a sound set. And it just, for that era, and the acting is great for that era. You know, if you're interested, I've got a link in the show notes and stuff for it, for James Ramsey Ullman. But like, if you got Disney Plus and you really want that classic, you know, vintage Disney adventure type of movie. Full disclosure, my son watched about half of it. My son's very empathetic. So like the scary bit where he's on the mountain and like he's nearly slipping and stuff, he doesn't do well because he's been on a mountain and he knows what that is. But otherwise, it's kid friendly, you know. Yeah, take a look at James Ramsey Ullman and his writings. For fun fact, after going down that rabbit hole on that date night with my wife for Father's Day, she went out to our local used bookstores and sourced a couple of first editions. So I actually have a couple of first editions. I'm going to start reading them. Yeah, it was really cool.
I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff, man. It's interesting, isn't it? How it always seems to be generationally, like you said, you got these guys who document everyone else's kind of expeditions and their achievements, but they kind of go quietly under the wayside because, like you said, they were too busy writing it for everyone else.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's really cool. I like that. I'll definitely check it out. I don't know if, like I said, Disney Plus in UK is the same as Disney Plus in America.
Yeah, I don't know either.
We shall find.
Yeah.
We shall find out when I log on and have a look. But AJ, it's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Yeah, bro.
To jump on the mic with you and do a podcast. Definitely going to have to do, continue to do these collaboration kind of podcasts more often. We'll wait for more watch puckery in the industry to happen. And we'll get on to another episode in due course. Yeah, get over, mate. We'll take you down to all things Penny fan, just to say you've done it. But yes, until then, mate, take care. We'll get back on the mic at some point, and hopefully everyone else enjoyed our little rant today.
Cheers. And that wraps up this edition of the Analog Explorer podcast. Thank you again so much for tuning in, rating and reviewing the Analog Explorer wherever you like to get your podcasts. But also, remember, this is a watch collecting episode. You came in halfway through, so if you want to hear the first half where Dan and I talk about, say, the Tudor Ranger and some other things, be sure you're subscribed to the Zulu Time podcast in your favorite podcast app of choice to get the first half. I'm AJ Barce, your Analog Explorer. Thank you again for joining me, and we'll be back soon.